All right, everybody. Well, we're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us. I imagine there will be some more folks joining us as time goes on. I wanted to let you know a few things about using BlueJeans if you're not familiar with it. By the way, I'm Catherine Lawrence. I work with the Science Gateways Community Institute in the community engagement area. And I'm your host, I guess, for the for this little piece of time. Anyway, your audio has been muted because we don't want to interfere with the sound that everyone else will be hearing. I also encourage you to turn off your video during the presentation. If you forget or it accidentally turns on, our moderator, Nighty, will switch it off. Those controls are on the bottom right. Also, you're welcome to submit questions by chat at any time. We'll be monitoring that for questions as appropriate. And in addition to me being here monitoring it, Steve, our presenter, also has Greg here with him. They're both from Globus, and he'll be keeping an eye on it. Also, just so you know, this presentation will be recorded, and the slides will be posted online shortly after this event. So with that, I'll let you, I'll hand off to Steve and Greg from Globus. And Steve, you are muted in case you are talking.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, interesting. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, good. Not sure how I got muted, but all right. Well, thank you, Catherine. So yeah, this is Steve Tuecke from University of Chicago, and I got Greg here with me as well. So Greg, as Catherine said, he'll be monitoring the chat, and I'll pause at various points so he can jump in and ask questions and turn this into a bit of a discussion as well. So I want to thank you for showing up today. I think we're going to spend the next hour really talking about where we've been focusing a lot of our time over the last year is really rolling out the Globus platform, right? For those who've been around for a while in the community know that we've been doing the Globus service, this cloud-based software as a service for about 7 years now, I think it's been. But now really focusing on how do we make this capability available to others so that you can build your own research data portals and applications and services leveraging this capability that we released. And that's what we're gonna really focus on today. And today is just an introduction. I always want to thank our sponsors, right? If you don't know, right, Globus, we're University of Chicago, right? We're not a company, we're a nonprofit at the university, really trying to provide high quality software for research data management to our community, to the research and national laboratory university community. And so, a lot of our funding, especially to bootstrap what we've been doing, has come from the sort of typical sources of federal agencies and grant foundations and the like. Of course, we want to thank our users who have really helped us get here over the last 7 years, really taken off the usage of the Globus services. A lot of data moving around, a lot of customers, and we particularly want to thank those of you who are out there who are subscribers to the service, right? Globus, our mission is to have a sustainable model so that we'll be here 1 and 2 decades from now, providing this high value software community. And one of the ways we do that is through subscriptions from universities and national labs and others to basically spread nominal costs across a large number of people to help support this going forward. So we always want to make sure we thank all of you who are supporting this effort. I'll also mention upcoming in mid-April is our next Globus World Conference. In many ways, today's presentation is sort of an intro to some detailed stuff we'll be doing at Globus World and on some other webinars over time as well. But we'll have a full day tutorials on the second day of Globus World, which will cover some of the stuff we're doing here today in much, much more detail. So if you're interested, come join us in Chicago. With that, let's jump in, right? So a lot of great material. I'm going to be referring back to this website repeatedly throughout the presentation. A lot of great material out on our new doc site, so please make use of that resource. So what we're really going to talk about today is the Globus platform as a service approach to delivering services that application and service developers in our community can build on, right? And this really comes straight out of the cloud world and the cloud model, right? Cloud has really obviously transformed how software and platforms are delivered to to our consumer lives with things like Netflix, and commercial world with things like Salesforce. But it's still really fairly early in the science community as being a really strong player here. And as many of you probably know, with Globus, we've, at the globus.org service we've had at the software as a service layer for the last 7 years, we've been providing end user capabilities through a browser-based experience, make it just work for file transfer and sharing and the like. And I'll talk about those a little bit more in a moment. But and when you look at the cloud stack at the bottom, of course, we run everything in Globus on Amazon. So, EC2, virtual machines, and virtual storage, and these sorts of stuff. But where a lot of the really interesting work in the cloud world is happening these days is really that middle layer, the platform as a service layer. That is, these services that have REST APIs. Sorry? Oh, it is screen lag? Yeah, we've been having trouble with BlueJean with this recently. Let me, I think the screen share locked. So what I'm going to do, way to fix this seems to be to stop sharing and reshare. So let me redo that.
Also, Steve, you might want to turn off, I think there's a setting for getting the notifications from your browser when someone sends a chat message. And you can turn that off and they won't keep on popping in, because they were doing that too.
Do you know where to turn that off?
Yeah, if you, the settings underneath share screen, if you touch that and then scroll down just a little further, and then browser notifications. Yep, there. Yeah.
Got it. Well, I'm here. I'll turn them all off. All right, good. Thank you. Let's see. So is the screen share back now? Yep. Yes. All right, good.
See your browser. Yep.
Thanks, Greg, for alerting me. All right, so back to this slide, right? So, in the cloud stack, we've got the software as a service at the top, right? That's what we've been doing for years now with Globus, with the browser-based apps. You've got the basic virtual storage and virtual machines at the bottom. But so saying, the real action these days, in many ways, is at that middle layer, the platform as a service, right? These services, that is, software being run by another group out in the cloud, right? That provides a REST API that other application developers can use to more quickly build their own applications, right? And Amazon, of course, is a poster child for a lot of this, with things like, database services and notification services and machine learning services and all this great stuff they have there. Well, that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is what we're doing with Globus to provide a set of platform as a services, that provide the capabilities of Globus to you, so that you can integrate those into your own applications and services, regardless of what language you're using for building your applications or science gateways, what sort of tools you're using, what sort of frameworks, whether it's Python or Ruby on Rails or Django, or that we're all agnostic to that, and that's one of the really key features of this platform as a service approach. So I just want to spend just a minute or two here on sort of re-level setting everybody on what does Globus provide, right? What is the functionality that we have in the Globus service? Because this is essentially the functionality that we're offering now through these platform REST APIs. The first bit, of course, we've had for quite a while now, and that still is what most people think of us as, is reliable file transfer, right? I have data all over the place. I have accounts all over the place, and on Exceed resources, University of Chicago's Research Computing Center, lab servers we've got here, my own desktops and laptops, various scientific instruments out there. And I need to schlep data around amongst these various systems that I have accounts on for a whole variety of reasons, right? It can be everything from pulling data out of scientific instruments into compute facilities where I can analyze that data. It can be for staging data up to Exceed that I can analyze, or pulling simulation results back down off of an Exceed system to a local system to do visualization of that. Can be downloading to my desktops and laptops. That's all of these are kind of use cases around what we call transfer, right? So, model is as a user, I just go in, log into the web interface, pick my endpoints. An endpoint is simply a storage system that's been connected to the Globus cloud on which we can do these operations, and says, go make it happen, right? And the user can walk away. We take care of reliably transferring it, deal with faults. If, networks fail or servers fail in the middle, pick up where it left off and just keep doing it. Make sure it happens quickly, reliably, securely, right? Now, the second main feature, and we'll talk about this some today in terms of how this is a really nice capability for the platform use cases, is what we call sharing. And sharing is, one way to think of it is transfer across users. But the typical use case here is I have data sitting on my University of Chicago Research Computing Center cluster, a typical GPFS file system, moderate size HPC cluster. And I've got some data there that I want to share with you all, right? Or with my project team or with an individual, partner that I'm working with, without requiring all of you to have to go get accounts on that system, without having to move that data to some intermediate source where I have to, I don't want to have to copy it into cloud storage or, through some other system. I just want to give you access to it so that you can come in and get that data and download it. Or maybe I want to have a place where you can deposit some data into my account so that I can make use of it, right? And that's really what sharing is about, is how do you make it really, really easy for users to share their data, right, from their existing storage systems, wherever they are. And we sometimes use the Dropbox analogy, right? If it's a small Word file, I might stick it on my Dropbox, click a few things, you get an email with a link you click on, and magic happens, and you have access to that file. Well, how can we have that same level of simplicity for my large data as well? And that's what sharing offers. And so we've had that out for several years now, and seeing great uptake on the use of that. So model is, again, I come in as a user to the web interface. I set my sharing permissions to say I want to share with a particular user or group. That collaborator or other user can come along and come in through the web interfaces and get access to that data, right? Do their own transfers from that. The next capability, I won't talk much about this today, but it's coming down the pipe in our platform in the not too distant future, is we've been doing a lot of work and released over the last year and a half, a whole new set of data publication capabilities in Globus that builds on sharing to do additional things of managing the whole workflows around data publication, of capturing metadata associated with my data sets, so that people can understand what it is. Maybe it's provenance data or it's data that's useful for search and discovery of that data sets. It's signing persistent identifiers like digital object identifiers to my data so that I have a nice unique identifier that I can use to refer to this and link to that from other data sets or from papers that I'm publishing. I want curation, right? There may be repositories where I have curators who are sort of making sure I have good curated collections of data for particular purposes. So they need the workflow tools to help them review that data and approve it or not. And then, of course, all of this with access control as well, right? For us, data publication isn't just public data, but it's really, it's really an enhancement of sharing in many ways. It's moving up the stack, providing these additional capabilities. But if I only want to publish to my research team, right, or to my project team, but I want the metadata and I want object identifiers and that sort of stuff, I can have all that. And ultimately, of course, one of the goals of this is then discovery. Allow other researchers to come in and search and find data sets, download them, perhaps for reproducibility, for extending results, all that sort of stuff, right? So ultimately, this is the functionality in a nutshell that Globus is providing as part of its research data management. All as a platform, right? As an end user, only things required really is a web browser. As we'll talk a lot about today, is there's also APIs for much of this. We're still building out the APIs for publish and discovery. You'll be hearing some announcements at Globus World about what we're doing on the search front. Key bit again, I always want to stress is we are not cloud storage, right? We are not a storage provider. We allow you to bring, or you decide what storage you want to use. You can bring your own storage. You can connect it to cloud storage of your choice. But ultimately, our job is to manage and orchestrate your data across these many systems, and to do that in a convenient way with respect to our campus ecosystem. So we have very good ties into InCommon, and other federated identity systems, Google, logins, Succeed logins, all these sorts of things. ORCID is a recent one we just added a couple weeks ago, right? So very good tie into these existing credentials so that you can use those credentials in the system that we've got. So that's kind of a quick intro to Globus. Maybe I'll pause. Any questions, Greg, that could come up on the chat that I should be? All right. All right, so let's move into the platform. It looks like the screen's still updating. That's good. So the couple big questions we're going to be really talking about at a high level today is, things like, how do you leverage Globus services from your own applications, right? If you want to build a science gateway that leverages our file transfer and our login and our federated identity and in the not too distant future data publication, all these sorts of things, how do you do that, right? How do you integrate that in so it's really a seamless part of your application or your service that you're building, right? But also, we want to go beyond that, right? We've done all this work in Globus, particularly on the identity and access management front, to provide the security infrastructure for securing our own REST APIs, right? To allow you to really easily, cleanly, nicely link our services into your applications. Well, we also want to make it so that if you want to create a service with your own REST API, that you can leverage all of those same capabilities that we're using in your own services. So you don't have to build out all of the security infrastructure for building secure REST APIs. And so we'll talk about that. And ultimately, this is a big part of our mission in Globus. As I said, we're here at University of Chicago trying to really raise the bar on the quality of software available to our community. And we know that's not something just we can do, right? We have to kind of empower the whole community, all of you, in helping build out and various aspects of this, whether it's applications for specific communities or services that others can leverage, right? That's really the fundamental goal of the Globus platform, right? Is empowering you to much more quickly get to interesting services and applications to serve your customers and your needs and your communities. So poster child for this for us over the last year or two has been National Center for Atmospheric Research has a system called RDA, the Research Data Archive. And this is a couple petabyte archive of climate and environmental data that's been around for several decades now. And even in the late 90s, they put a whole web interface on this, allow users to come in from all over the world, find data in this archive, search, discover, even specify subsetting, so they'll do on-the-fly data slicing and things like that. But ultimately, they have 30,000 users around the world who come to their Science Gateway, their web portal, and get data and download it so that they can use it, right? And one of the challenges that RDA has really been struggling with over the last several years is that the data volumes have been growing tremendously, right? That they're getting up into many, tens of terabyte data sets. And the downloads were getting harder and harder for users because traditionally they basically give you a curl script or a wget script that you would run locally to pull down the data, but that was fragile and not very performant and just had all sorts of issues for the users, right? The user experience was not good, but it also had all sorts of issues for the gateway developers because that was now all data and traffic that had to be flowing through their web servers and was really causing problems on them running their systems. And so the natural question they asked a couple of years ago was, Globus, you guys got all this data transfer stuff. Why can't we use that within our web application? How can we set this up so that a user can seamlessly log into our portal, do just what they do today, but get this extra option instead of saying download via these curl scripts, instead just say download or transfer to somewhere via Globus and let the system take care of it, but with a clean user experience end to end. And ultimately, this is exactly what we're going to be showing you how to do today at a high level. And then you see up in the upper left corner there, the login, right? Is RDA, they've got a username password database that they've been building up, they said, with 30,000-ish users in it. But they would like to add things like federated identity support. They would like to allow these other identities from InCommon and the like to be used by their portal. and not require all their users to have to get yet another username and password to use the RDA system. And so they would also like to use Globus for that. And so that's also an area we've been working with them on, and we're going to talk about that today as well. Right? So ultimately, this is what we're going to focus on today. And the way we've rolled this out is essentially by adding, to first order for the purpose of this talk, REST APIs onto the various functionality that we have in Globus. And then about a year ago, introduced a whole new system we call Globus Auth, which provides the web-based, OAuth-based security foundation for all of this, for all the REST security and login support. So just to make this more concrete, I'm going to show you a little demo now of a sample research data portal that we've built that's open source out on GitHub. It's in Python, uses Flask and Jinja 2 templates for how it's implemented. So fairly typical basic, Python web server code that provides a sort of shows end-to-end all the different ways that you integrate a portal like this with Globus. And we did this specifically so that you all could take this away and look at it, use it, leverage it, use it however you want. So let me run through that to really make this concrete. Let me pull up a browser here, and I'm running, just so you don't see, there's no magic behind the curtain here. I've got running here on localhost 5000 this portal. So I had downloaded it previously. In the tutorial, we do a Globus world. We have you do this all as part of the tutorial. Let's go ahead and run it. All right, so come into the portal. And so we see here a web portal, right? Like many portals, the first thing we need to do is log in or sign up. So let's go ahead and log into this. And so what it's going to do is redirect us over to the Globus login, federated login pages, right? And this is the exact same pages that if you've used the globus.org service as an end user, it's the exact same pages, same service, everything, same accounts under here. And what this allows you to do is select from a large number of identity providers to get single sign-on, right? So I can use University of Chicago. I can log in with my University of Chicago ID. I can use my Google account if I want to log into this. Exceed is in here. I can use Exceed, various other national facilities like NERSC, and even various gateways. For example, NCAR RDA, those 30,000 identities that they already have, we linked them in and added them as an identities to this as well, so that we have a very clean model for those. So let me go ahead and log in with University of Chicago. This will redirect me out to the University of Chicago website. I log in with my normal University of Chicago account. Brings me back in and takes me to what's called a consent page, right? So if you've ever used login with Google or login with Facebook, right? You know that when an application, web application out there wants to log you in using, say, your Google account, it takes you to the Google site, you log in with your Google account, and then the next screen it asks you is, do you want to give this application your email address or the information about you, or give them access to your Google Drive account, or whatever that site is requiring, right? And there's an allow deny. It's exactly the same thing you're seeing here, right? You're saying, yeah, I'm okay letting the sample data portal have access to my account for the purpose of seeing various information about me, my login name and stuff like that they're going to transfer files on my behalf using Globus. You're going to be, getting access to my group, stuff like that. Right, so I'll go ahead and allow that. And I'm in, and that's a one-time consent, just like it is on other social login sort of thing. So it's now in there. So now this is our sample data portal. The actual portal itself, the data in it is just basically daily weather information from a dozen or so airports around the country from 1950 onwards. And so that's our fancy schmancy repository. But now what can we do with that using Globus? We can do a few things. So one is I can browse into various portions of this, and these are just files sitting out on an HTTP server. And I'll talk about this in a little bit about the new Globus HTTP server for your endpoints. So that's where these are sitting. And I can do things like, say, download them. Right? So with simple browser-based download, I can see these things, click on it, and soon as this Excel comes up, right, you see there's the weather and climate, or the weather information from this airport. Right, or if I go back up here, I can say, let's pick a couple data sets. And so this is an example of, for example, that NCAR RDA. And I want to say, here's a couple data sets I care about. I want you to place them somewhere for me. I want you to put them out on my University of Chicago cluster and tell me when it's done, right? Don't make me download it. Don't make me worry about all these details. Just put it there and be done with it. And so we have this transfer button. And this redirects us over to what we call a helper page. This is, again, page provided by the Globus service that allows me to pick where I want this data to go. And it has all the functionality of our normal web application. So I can search for endpoints. Maybe I want it on an Exceed resource. So I could say, put it out on Exceed Gordon. And I could pick that. Or I've got my laptop here, right? So you can see here's my Globus Connect running on my laptop, so I could download data. But let's go ahead and put it out on Midway. You also maybe saw there's bookmarks in there. I'll show that again quick. So we got, if there's endpoints that I use regularly, my endpoints, right? All this stuff to help users get to the right endpoints. But ultimately, what I'm trying to do is say, let's put this data out at University of Chicago, and let's go ahead and even create a folder out there for this. So we'll call this the Science Gateway Demo, SG Demo. And create that folder. Again, this is the University of Chicago's Research Computing Center cluster. Where is that? Let's go ahead and select that. And submit. So now what I've done is I've selected where I want our Science Gateway, our portal, to put its data. And what it's doing now is that portal went out and submitted a transfer request to the Globus services on my behalf using the REST APIs of the Globus service, and then is monitoring it, right? And this particular portal is a stupid, simple little interface where I can just refresh, where it can go out and recheck the status of my transfer. But of course, you could do all this sort of stuff in the background with the APIs, right? And so now you see it's succeeded. So if I jump over, go ahead and get logged in our web application here. So this is a normal Globus site. Go ahead and log in with that. And go out to that same site. Here's the SG demo folder, and we'll see it's put a couple folders in here with these different airports and with CSV files for each of the years from them, right? So again, jumping back to the portal, right? The model, we're trying to suggest here is one where I've got my data sitting out here on an endpoint for relay to this portal. The portal can orchestrate all of these behaviors of transferring data around, moving it around as necessary with with access control and all that, and just make this work. And so in the tutorial, we'll show you step by step how to do all these things. And all this code is open source. Well, let's take this even a step further, right? That we want portals that can also do things like, say, let's move instead of having the front end do things, let's do some data slicing, right? So or data analysis. In this case, what it's going to actually do is some graphing. It's going to take the weather data from this airport for 1953 and generate graphs. But the way it's going to do this is talk to a completely separate REST service out there that's actually the graph generator. That service will download that data from the endpoint, generate the graphs, upload the graphs, make those graphs available only to me, and then return back to the application. And so there we are. And so if I were to click on one of these, we'll see it'll pop up the SVG file with the graph in it, and I've got my portal, right? So hopefully you can see, with this sort of simple little example portal, the sorts of things that you can do with Globus, where every bit of this data access, both the transfer-based data movements as well as all of these browser-based accesses to these graphs, all of this is happening via Globus and Globus endpoints, all with security. We've been talking to back-end REST services as well as front-end, but all just kind of neatly put together in this application. All right, so let me pause there. Any questions before I sort of move on and start talking about how we did this?
There was a question, what language was it written?
Yeah, so the portal, this sample portal was written in Python using the Flask framework and with Jinja 2 templates for the interface. But as I said earlier, there's nothing specific about what we've done in the integrations that are specific to Python. We have some nice tools for Python, but and this code is all open source, so help yourself to it if you want to leverage it, use it, and all that.
I posted the link and
great.
It's a good takeaway.
Excellent. So let's talk then about how do all these pieces fit together, right? How is it that you can build a portal like that? And this picture.
One thing you might want to mention is you use the term endpoint. You may want to clearly define what that means.
Okay. Yeah, an endpoint, they said, is simply a storage system out there that's been connected to the Globus cloud by running the Globus Connect server software, right? So when I was in here searching around all these different places, all these things are different endpoints. We got Midway, Exceed, all these, right? So these are just storage systems, as is my laptop here, right? So this is an endpoint as well. Again, what our real mission is with the Globus services is, given all of these storage systems out there that are endpoints that are, run this Globus Connect software to connect it to the cloud, providing all this functionality on top of that to make use of it. And I'll be talking in just a few minutes about a key aspect of this as we get into science DMZs. Right, so ultimately, what I'm just going to walk through at a very high level today, and like I said, if you want more information, go look at all the sample code and come visit us at Globus World or reach out to us. But I'm going to be talking about, ultimately in what you just saw, this picture here, the portal web server client. This is that Python sample code, right? And what it was doing was linking into this whole ecosystem to see everything you just saw, right? For login purposes, it made use of Globus Auth to do that. When I did the graphing, right, when I said go generate a graph, that was this portal sitting here making REST calls out to a completely separate service. And if I even go over here, that service is the thing running in this window, right? So it's running in localhost 5100, completely separate REST service that it's talking to do the actual graphing, place the data out on the endpoint, right? All of the data is not actually living on the same machine as the portal server, right? None of this data is on my laptop, even though I'm running the portal on the laptop. All the data is actually sitting out here in a portal endpoint. And specifically, the endpoint that it's living in is a tutorial endpoint we've set up for these purposes that you'll be able to use with this same sample portal. All the data sitting out in here, right? So here's the portal, and in here, here's the catalog, right? So this is all of the different data sets for each of the airports that's showing up in there. And that portal is simply doing essentially directory listings on this to find out the various information. And then when it created the graph, it simply put the data into this processed folder. If I open that up, scroll down, we should see here's Tuecke at U Chicago, right? So that, based on my identity, this is where it put the data, and this is what we saw in this portal screen right here, right? So it was just doing, again, listings on that, right? So the key point here is that we've really outsourced all of this data management stuff, all the data storage aspects and the access to that data storage to an endpoint, to a Globus Connect server endpoint. And as I'll talk about in a moment, running in a science DMZ, right? And so that gives us all sorts of advantages for implementing our server. And so, for example, in the NCAR case, what that allowed them to do is say, okay, the RDA group, we're not going to run the storage systems ourselves. We're going to have the NCAR storage group run the storage systems and all the software, all the Globus Connect software and all that stuff, and we're just going to use it, right? And all that data no longer has to flow through my portal to use it, right? You saw the helper page when in the portal when I said where do you want to transfer to. Somebody come on, or there we go.
Hi, Steve. Do you hear me?
I have
Yeah.
one. That's Sandra.
Yeah, sorry, the quality is a little bit bad here. So I have one question. So if I have, for example, a project with iRods already, and I would like to add global services with it, do you have an integration with iRods, or would you treat it as an endpoint, or how would that go?
Yeah, so iRods would be an endpoint, and we're actually working now with the iRods team to update the software for Globus Connect to have Globus Connect interface to iRods cleanly. There's stuff out there that came out of the European community a few years ago, and we're basically just getting that all cleaned up with the iRods team to get that out there.
Thanks.
All right, so then in the portal, you recall also when I said transfer to the University of Chicago endpoint, there was a page it redirected to allow sort of picking of what endpoint and path. Those are the helper pages in this picture. And then, of course, when I logged into it, it went all the way back to my University of Chicago identity provider, which is up here at the top, right? So essentially what we're trying to convey is this model where portal worries about its business logic, if you will, right? It's concerned about making certain types of data available through certain interfaces. It shouldn't have to be worried about all these issues of linking to identity providers and linking to endpoints and all this sort of stuff. That should all be behind the scenes that it can use. And so that's kind of the model we've got here. And then, of course, on the front end, browser-based applications are a big part of things, but that's not the whole world, right? We also want other forms of applications, desktop applications, mobile applications, command line, right? All of these are other forms of applications that need to be supported and are supported with the Globus platform. So let's drill into a few of these, and we're just going to run through these pretty fast. We got takeaways, leave behinds for all of this, but I just want to familiarize you with sort of how the pieces fit together, and that's going to be my goal over the next 10-15 minutes of this tutorial. Right. So the first bit is Globus Transfer. Right, the Transfer API. One of the services that Globus has is the Transfer service that has a REST API. And essentially anything you can do in the Globus web app, transfer, sharing, directory listing, searching, everything that you see there, all is in this Transfer API, right? And we have good docs out on our website with the details of the Transfer API for to go in. It's a REST API, right? So you can go out and look at things like file operations, right? So I can see what are the various REST calls for doing directory listing and the various document formats, the JSON documents that come back, right? Very typical standard REST stuff here. We also have a Python SDK, which is a little wrapper library around the REST API for Globus Auth and for transfer, just to make it a little easier to integrate the REST APIs into Python code. At the moment, we do not have SDKs in other languages, in part because we're a Python shop, and that's kind of what we have and know. We'd be very interested in working. We had a student project last summer where we actually created some bits of a Java SDK and even a sample data portal in Java. We'd be very interested if people in the community would like to really get involved in an open source project to really build out the Java SDK. It's not something we really have the expertise anymore in this group to do, but we'd be happy to work with groups out there in the community to get a Globus Java SDK as well. The Python one's open source, and it's same with we want to do on a Java one. In this API, I won't spend any real time on this. So it's everything from endpoint search, right, helping me find my endpoints, to getting information about those endpoints and looking at them and things like that. Endpoint activation, this is how you get credentials, how you basically provide credentials so that the transfer service can act on your behalf or on the user's behalf in doing transfers. Call that activating an endpoint. We have file operations, the ones you'd expect, ls, make, dir, rename, stuff like that. Task submission, right? The model in the Transfer API is a very Java-like model, where what I do is I submit a request in with, here's the file I want to transfer. We also have rsync-like functionality, so I can say, if I want to update a destination based on changes to the source, I can do that with only transferring what's changed. Also deletes are a task model, right? So I can say go delete that huge thing out there and tell me when you're done. And there's stuff for making sure you have clean submission of that only once submission through submission IDs and the like. Task management, once you've submitted a task, right? So in a portal, I may say, go off and submit the task, and now I can sit behind the scenes and monitor it. See if how it's progressing, if there's issues, faults or otherwise that I want to surface to the user or that my portal admins want to deal with. Great, I can do all that. Bookmark APIs, shared endpoint access rules, right? So, just to show you what that looks like in the web app, because, a lot of people really haven't seen this that much in Globus. Let me go back out to the University of Chicago site and say, I want to take this My Project folder here and share it with Greg. Right, so first thing I do is I take this folder and I do what's called create a shared endpoint or a share. It's I think of it as creating an export or a mount point, if you will, in some sense. Right, so I'll call this share with Greg or share with SG demo, right? Because it could be for one user, or it could be for many users. So I've created that. And so now what I've done is taken this one folder from University of Chicago and kind of made it available as this virtual endpoint. Now, having done that, I can say, let's go share this with Greg. So we'll search for Nawrocki. Let's share that with his University of Chicago, identity. Here's the data you wanted. And he's now, or will in another few seconds, have an email sitting in his inbox with a link that he can click on that will allow him to go right to this endpoint and see it just like any other endpoint, right? So what he would see, SG demo, if I search for that, there it is, there's the endpoint. Greg will see that, right? Which is the same, it's getting me to the same data on disk at University of Chicago as going there directly, right? So in our APIs, we have everything for managing shared endpoints, for creating them, for setting permissions, doing these invitations, sharing to groups. All these things are available in the APIs, and this is used pretty heavily in portals. So, for example, in the NCAR case with their RDA portal, when I come along and ask for a given data set, and maybe they do some data slicing even on that, what they actually do is they have a shared endpoint associated with the portal that the portal controls. They create a folder for me in that endpoint. They stick the data in that folder. They put a permission on the folder that shares that data only with me, and then they transfer it, right? Or allow me to come in and get it, or proactively transfer it to me. And then when I'm done, they clean it all up, right? And they can do all of that through our APIs against the endpoint. Then we also have a whole management API. So for sysadmins, we have our console in our application that allows me as an administrator of an endpoint to see everything going on in my endpoints, to see faults, all this sort of stuff. I can pause and resume things, cancel things, all that. Again, all of that is available through the APIs on the transfer service as well. And this is really interesting because it allows you to start building even more custom integrations as an admin on these storage systems. If you want to monitor different things, or as an endpoint, if you want to do aggregated management of a lot of tasks, you can do all that through the API there. Now, to help you learn all this, we also have created a Jupyter notebook that uses the Python SDK to show how to do all this, right? And again, it's an open source GitHub project out here at this URL. And I did install it also so that you can see what it looks like. So again, I put this on my local machine and fired it up here locally. And so if we go back out to the browser, here it is, right? So we've got a Jupyter notebook that I can just run through and do things. So, let me go ahead and just do the first couple things. Let me go ahead and get logged in. We don't have super deep integration of the login, but it's partly on purpose so you can even see how to do full login flows for what we call native apps, which is like command line and mobile apps. My SG demo. So again, consent screen. So we've done it very manually here, but you don't have to do it all manually yourself. So sort of do the flow, run it. So now this Jupyter notebook is logged in as me. And now I can start doing stuff, right? So I can say, let's go get the information about an endpoint. Right? So it's now going out, making a call using, this is the Globus Python SDK call, making a call to get the information about this endpoint, which is defined up here at the top. As in every endpoint has a UUID that defines it, and then has lots of additional information about it. So it went out, let me find it again here. Here we go. Right, did a get on that endpoint, got the information, and shows me some of the information about it. Just in that document there, right? So there you can see that's Globus. Its display name is tutorial endpoint 1, owned by blah, 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 right? So this has basically all of the commands in it. The endpoint search, endpoint details, the file operations, directory listings, that sort of stuff. Task management shows you how to do task submissions, how to monitor tasks, get information about them, how to wait properly for completion, bookmarks, right? So the whole point of this is so that you can take this away, put it on, download it yourself and have at it and really play around with this. And if you haven't seen Jupyter, one of the great things about it, of course, is it's a live Python environment. So I can just go modify things here and say, I don't want all that data. So let's go ahead and comment that out. I'll rerun it. Whoops. Forget, not a Python head either. Yeah, hash, that's right, duh. I can type. Right, so rerun it, and now it'll just print those few things out, right? Or if I want to change it to say, get information about an endpoint, a different endpoint, I can do that, right? So it allows me to play around with the Python SDK from this Jupyter notebook. So highly encourage, if you want to play around with it, do. So that's essentially the transfer API and the capabilities we have there. Now, as I mentioned, a key part of our story, right, and a key part of our value to a Science Gateway developer is allowing you to make direct use of all of these Globus endpoints out there, right? Allowing you to do transfers directly from and to them, and with our new HTTP server, even get data directly from them. And a big reason for this has to do with science DMZs, right? So we've had great success over the last 4 or 5 years in this community, in the science community, rolling out these science DMZs, thanks to some programs like the CC Star program out of NSF, where it's really helped a lot of campuses build out their network environments and their sort of endpoint environments where where Globus Connect runs, to provide really high quality, high performance access to storage systems, right? So all the Exceed endpoints run this, probably 40 or 50, 60 universities, and probably more than that now, probably between 50 and 100 universities with science DMZs in place, national labs, all of this. And the beauty here is what it allows you to do is keep your portal code where it should be, right? Safe behind firewalls and wherever, sort of in, you don't need beefy you don't need huge servers that can handle all that data. But then all these data paths can go directly through the Science DMZ to your file systems, right? So that when you're in this picture, again, whenever I do data transfers, that data is not coming through the portal. It's going directly over that Science DMZ, the high performance managed paths, to that data, to those storage servers, right? So big benefit there. And then, of course, on those Science DMZs, we provide the Globus Connect software that provides really 2 key things, right? One is, of course, the grid FTP support, the really high performance managed file transfer support. But second is we're in beta testing now, and we'll be releasing more generally this spring, all goes according to plan here, HTTP support for all these endpoints as well, right? So that you can get to all the same data with all the same security capabilities, either via the managed file transfer approach or directly via HTTP. So you can link it into your web portals, your browser, start building inline viewers into your web applications, do browser-based upload, build other applications or use applications that have HTTP client support already in them, great. You can use that to get directly to the data on these endpoints. And so it really unlocks all of this data that's sitting in all these research storage systems and makes them really part of the web, right? And it's using all the standard web protocols, HTTP and OAuth to do this. So again, we'll be talking a lot more about that at Globus World. All right, I'll pause for a second there. Any questions before I move on to security?
That was very timely because we had a question about that. The HTTP model where you can just grab it from a browser.
Okay, what about it?
No, you answered it.
Okay,
you
good.
just answered it. There was another question about the sharing of endpoints. Can everybody see a shared endpoints, or only the people there are explicitly shared?
Yep. So currently with a shared endpoint, anyone can see a shared endpoint, but it doesn't mean they have any access to it. And in fact, as a user, if I have permissions only for one folder within a shared endpoint, that's the only folder I'll even see when I go to that shared endpoint. So we do a lot of masking of the actual file path information. Now, as a little preview of what's coming down the pipe, I mentioned the data search capabilities as part of our publication work. That's actually going to be adding the ability to do also allowing shared endpoints to only be visible to people who have access control rights on that shared endpoint. Right? So that will be coming, just not quite here yet.
I answered the question improperly. I was referring to the data on the endpoint. No, the endpoint is indeed visible.
Yeah.
The data, of course, is not.
That's right. All right, any other questions? Keep moving. I think we're down to the last throws here. So let's talk about Globus Auth, right? So the challenge that we were faced with ourselves, and probably many of you are as well, is how do you provide all the identity and access management capabilities to provide two broad categories of functionality, right? One of it is login, right? Not just to web applications, but mobile apps, right? So just like on my phone, if I say log in with Google,
I think we've...
did we freeze again? Okay, let me, oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back here. Stop sharing, reshare. Go back into presentation mode. Are we back?
Yes.
All right. All right. So Globus Auth, right? So the question is, how do we make it so that you can provide, we've got these great login capabilities for our applications and services, right, with Globus that have federated login and don't require users to have yet another username and password, right? So how can you leverage all of that? Second is, how do you protect all these REST API communications, whether it's from your apps to our services, or if you want to build your own services, or even service-to-service interactions, right? So that I can have one service call another and do that all cleanly, right? And then doing it cleanly is the hard part, right? And so that's really what Globus Auth is about, is providing this identity and access management platform service that essentially acts as this broker between all of these different parties, of the end users, the identity providers, the services with their REST APIs, the applications that want to use those, and even services talking to other services, and manage these authentication and authorization interactions between them. So again, lots of doc out there on the doc site. We've got an introductory doc, a developer guide for sort of on the ground using it, and a reference API doc for all this. But ultimately, it's all web stuff, right? It's OAuth and OpenID Connect. So if you've this is what essentially the whole web is using these days. If you go to any Googles, Facebooks, Twitters, anybody out there on the web with REST APIs to first order, this is what they're using. So if you know that stuff, you now know how to use Globus Auth. There's no mysteries here. There's a few small extensions we've made for a few use cases, but it's all just standard OAuth from a typical client or application perspective. So you can use even existing OAuth client libraries like the Google ones. We do provide some in the Python SDK if you want them, but there's no need. It also means that other things can link very easily in this. So for example, I guess it's down a little further, Exceed has already, Jetstream, its web interface has used this to link in. We've linked into the Exceed Jira, few other Exceed tools, pretty easily. Drupal using Globus Auth, right? The model in Globus is that it's really a set of identities. This is a really important part of our model for handling the whole federated identity ecosystem, and the fact that, you know, I have University of Chicago account and an Exceed account and a NERSC account and an RDA account. How do I bring these together into a coherent environment so I don't have to, so I can manage them coherently is the short answer. And then Globus takes care of that for you. Standard OAuth, so I won't go through this. You know, it's basically just the flow, where as an app, I redirect off to Globus Auth. It redirects off the identity provider where I log in, comes back to Auth where I consent. Then I get an access token back into my client application. I optionally get a OpenID Connect ID token with the user login, the username and stuff like that. Then I can use the token to flow it over the REST call, standard OAuth here. Then this is the one step where we start moving beyond a lot of typical OAuth stuff out there. We also then allow the resource server to come back, talk to Globus Auth, and validate that token, right? It's called introspection. It's going to spec for that out of IETF standard for this. And then turn around and also say, okay, I want to make downstream calls to additional REST APIs on behalf of that user. We call these dependent requests, calling dependent services. So I need to get dependent access tokens to allow me to call that. And Globus Auth handles all of that cleanly. And so within a portal like this, you know, various use cases for all this, of course, is things like login. I mentioned Jetstream's using this, DOE projects like KBase, Exceed user portals and testing of it right now. So just like you think of login with Google, you can think of login with Globus, right? It's sort of use Globus as the means to handle the authentication of users to your system. We have full branding in this so that, you know, you can keep users sort of in your branded namespace. So here's the Compute Canada version, right, that has headers and additional text and default identity providers that you provide, but users still see that that's still a Globus account that they're using, right? So they understand that. You can make REST requests off of that, right? I talked about the access tokens from that. I mentioned earlier non-browser-based apps, right? Browser-based apps is the typical universe for OAuth, but there is a whole universe of OAuth for example, mobile apps. And then we've basically leveraged that universe for handling command line and desktop applications as well. And that's actually what the Jupyter Notebook was using in a very manual way to see how it works. So we have a whole clean model for doing command line. And so, for example, one of the uses of this, mobile apps, as I mentioned, so just like from a mobile app, you can do login with Google, you can do login with Globus with the right things happening. Desktop command line apps, we even have a new CLI, command line interface. Let me just pop that up for a minute here, right, where I can run Globus and do things like Globus endpoint search. Let's look for Midway. Right, and so I had previously authenticated using our native app support. So I can say, you know, okay, there's an endpoint, do a search, right? So all the same capabilities that are available through the web application are available through the command line. So now I'll do an LS on that University of Chicago endpoint, all from command line, right? So that's just using this mobile or this native app support and refresh tokens. So you can do long-term tokens, all this sort of stuff. You can do all this yourself. So if you want to build command line applications, you can do the same things. And we even have example code for all that as well out in this GitHub repo. So we call them our native app examples, showing how to do, you know, these different sorts of flows for native apps, command line apps, things like that to authenticate with Globus Auth. Next use case, I think we're on the home stretch finally, is apps invoking services at itself, right? So one of the use cases we run across fairly regularly, particularly as you're building portals, is in many cases you want the portal to act on the user's behalf, right? So when I was showing you the sample data portal earlier, you know, we were doing a transfer as the user to a user's endpoint. So that was using the token that was authenticated via OAuth from the user. But there's times where I want the portal to have its own identity. And in the Exceed community, we often have these community credentials, community accounts, right? This gives you the equivalent of that, right? So that you can have the portal having its own identity, that it can do everything now on its own behalf. And there's a standard OAuth flow called the client credential grant, where a portal can log in using its client ID and secret, get back access tokens, and then it can do things on its own behalf. So recall earlier when I mentioned the RDA site, and that portal creates a directory for the data for the user, sets permissions on that folder, loads the data into that folder, and then transfers the data for that user, right? All those first operations of creating the folder, setting the permissions, all of that stuff happens as the portal, not as the user, right? Because the user doesn't have permissions to do that sort of stuff on the shared endpoint. They can only transfer out, right? So the portal has its own identity that it can use for certain operations against, these shared endpoints and otherwise. And then through the tokens that it gets through OAuth and through dependent token grants, it can also act on behalf of the user, subject to the user's consents that they've done there, right? So again, very clean models in Globus Auth for handling all of this. Helper pages, right? We have various helper pages out there for allowing you to browse and select an endpoint, activate endpoints. So if a user needs to, if the user hasn't logged in recently to an endpoint, for example, if they want to do a transfer to an Exceed endpoint, you need to log in to reactivate it. We have a nice panel that you can simply redirect the user's browser to do that. Selecting groups, managing identities and consents, logging out, right? Log out turns to be a little touchy in federated identity scene, so we've got a log out helper page, right? Again, doc on that here that you can go to. Just again, pages, all of this is skinnable so that you can make these even look like your web applications. Of course, all of this ties into your own identity providers and the existing identity providers. So today, when you look at that set that we've got on our login page, it's basically all of the in-common sites that release research and scholarship attributes to CI login. And so there's, I don't know, somewhere between 150 and 200 of them these days. But Globus Auth lets other identity providers play as well. So you saw we have Google, groups like RDA, NERSC, which is not part of in-common, Exceed is a good example of this, or additional identity providers. And you can add your own as well, right? So you saw RDA in that list. And one of the things that allowed RDA to do was to integrate with Globus, but in a way where RDA users still only had to worry about RDA usernames and passwords, right? So the RDA users could log into Globus and into the portal and all these things using their existing RDA username and password. And Globus knows what to do that. And then over time, RDA can incrementally add federated identity support and all that. I won't go into that, right? Other services. Oh, I guess we are just a couple of minutes over. So let me wrap up here, right? I talked about dependent services, so you can call down these chains, right? We have all the tools for you to create your own REST APIs. If you want to, put services like RDA putting a REST API in front of their service, we have all the stuff to make it easy for you to secure that. Or if you want to separate your portal into various parts. Dependent tokens to allow services to call each other, right? All of that stuff's out there, right? So with that, let's wrap up. Encourage you to join the Globus developer community. We have this mailing lists out here, all these open source things we talked about today that you can go play with. Come visit us at Globus World if you can. We can learn a lot more about what we're up to and what other people like yourselves are up to. And thank you for participating.
There was one additional question. All login is handled by HTTPS, correct? There's no HTTP.
That's correct. All login is HTTPS, standard OAuth stuff there. Yep. All right.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Steve. That was a whirlwind, but very comprehensive tour. That was excellent for me to learn anyway, because I know nothing about this, but now I know more. So I appreciate you're taking the time to share this with us. I noticed that our next webinar is during Globus World, so I guess we won't see you on that, but I hope we see some of the other attendees. We'll have a Gateway Showcase with a couple of different Gateway projects to be featured. So yeah, and I encourage everyone to give us feedback on that link there, or also I put a link in chat. It takes less than 30 seconds, in fact, but we love to get your feedback and also input about new topics. So So Steve, thank you so much, and Greg too for wrangling in the background and letting him know when the slides weren't advancing. I couldn't tell because I didn't know the content well enough to know whether it was supposed to be just additional conversation. So,
all right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks all.
Bye.